Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and today I'm coming to you with the 7 books that I read in the first half of May. June. No, we're in June. What the hell? Bruising of Kilwa by Nassim Jimnia, and this is a Persian-inspired fantasy book, which I was really excited to read because I'm Persian, and the main character is non-binary, and for the most part, I felt like this was a really short book, and thusly there just wasn't enough world building and wasn't enough plot, I guess. The plot was like really simple, and I felt like the conflict therefore was really, really truncated. But overall, I would really like to see more from this author. Verbal Judo, I read this for my Works Book Club. This is basically about uh, a form of talking to people in a way that gets them to cooperate with you rather than just kind of trying to tell them what to do. And so the author of this book was a police officer, and this is how he kind of came up with how to kind of tell people to do things so that he doesn't necessarily have to arrest them and all of that. And so he goes around teaching these things to police officers as well as business people, which seems like a really good idea to me. There's a lot of stuff in here about like empathizing with other people, and that doesn't necessarily mean put yourself in their shoes and like, how would you feel if you were in that situation, but actually thinking about they're not you, how do they feel in that situation. So for example, like a pretty extreme example from this book is where when he was still a police officer, he had to go and stop this guy from killing his own son, basically, and the guy thinks that his son is possessed. Basically, the long and the short of it is that and so he tries everything. He tries to tell him like, that's not, I'm sure you don't want to do that or whatever. But finally he settles on, tell you what, I know a priest who can bless him and then he won't be possessed anymore. How does that sound? And obviously that's not true, but it was like appealing to what the guy actually thought was going on and what his actual thinking was, that type of thing. So there's definitely a lot in here that that I found really useful already. I've already been putting a lot of this into practice, and I feel like it's really helpful, and it is really interesting because it is something that we all kind of know. I mean, we don't necessarily think too deeply into, obviously do the right thing for people, blah, blah, blah. But like, we all kind of know the basics of that. But in this, it's kind of deep diving into that and what you should really be telling people or asking people in order to get them to do what you want them to do. And instead of getting them to be like defensive and whatnot. So it is really, really interesting. I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons by Peter S. Beagle. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year. This is by the author of The Last Unicorn. The Last Unicorn is one of my favorite books of all time. This, I'm afraid, was a little bit disappointing to me. I did not expect it to be The Last Unicorn by any means, but it really kind of fell flat in that the entire plot was really basic. All the characters were very like representative of like one thing. They're just kind of one way. They were not well rounded at all. Even when I thought it was starting to get into the more profound, like, oh, here are some statements you can take away from this book, that's pretty clever, it didn't really do any more of that at all. And I was kind of like, man, really? Whereas in The Last Unicorn, there is a lot that's really profound, and there are tons of quotes in there that I quote all the time, that type of thing. But this was very like just a lot more basic. So the premise of it is pretty clever. It's about a princess whose castle is infested with dragons, and dragons in this world take the place of like flies and rats and stuff. So she's just like batting dragons out of her face, and she's like, oh no, this prince who's coming like isn't gonna want to marry me if my castle is a gigantic mess, blah de blah. So she tells her parents like, we really need to get these dragons out of here ASAP. So they call a dragon exterminator, and the dragon exterminator is this kid who like uh he keeps trying to like rescue dragons, and so he has a lot of dragons in his house that are like his pets and stuff like that. And so the whole idea is like kind of an interesting premise, and it's kind of clever thinking outside the box a little bit, but overall this entire book was just more flat and like basic than what I wanted. And it was also kind of weird because the main characters are not supposed to be like kids. I'm not really sure how old they're supposed to be necessarily, but a lot of this read like middle grade when it's not. And um and so I kept picturing the main characters as being like 12 or something, but they're not. They're like late teens or early 20s or something, somewhere in there. So this whole book just did not tie things together very well, and overall I was a little bit disappointed. Of course, it would not be Pride Month if I did not consult my TBR for the gayest unread book on my list, and that is The Breakup List by Adib Khorram. This is about a gay deaf Iranian boy who basically falls in love with this friend of his who ends up dating his sister, so it's like really awkward, but obviously the friend is not really that into the sister. He just dated her because she asked him and all of that. So when he realizes that he can't just keep doing that, he breaks up with her. The sister's really hurt, and our main character is caught between, you know, trying to be a good brother and like be there for his sister regarding that, and like dating the guy and not wanting to tell his sister because it would just hurt her more and all of that. So it's insane. This book is like, it's a fairly simple story, but the conflict in it was so like, you just know something bad is going to happen. It's all going to come to light. Like, you know that everything that everyone's lying about in the story is all going to come to light. So you're just cringing the whole time. So it is kind of interesting how like it is a really simple story, like super, super simple, bare bones, like boy meets boy, blah, 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 like that's it. But it's so addictive. And so it was really, really good, and I really liked it. And it also answered a lot of questions about like what it's like to be deaf, because I was just not anything I had thought about at all. And so it was just, that was just really, really interesting. So I feel like I learned a lot about hearing aids and being deaf and all of that that I had never even thought of. So that was kind of interesting as well. The Justed Heir by Sarah Hashem. This is a book that I had really high expectations for, and unfortunately it really fell flat for me. I just did not get it. I don't get the hype surrounding this book, unfortunately. I think I mean, I typically have an issue with books that are about taking back a kingdom or taking back a throne, etc., etc. And my issue is typically that we don't see why. Like, it's not really given to us in any way why it matters if they get the kingdom back or not. Like, how's that really gonna affect the, you know, like, we don't see how the difference in who's ruling affects the common folk or any of that. So I don't really get, it takes a lot for me to get invested in a story about taking back a kingdom or any of that. And in the case of this story, the kingdom in question was actually like totally burned to the ground and whatnot. So I'm not even sure why. Like, again, it really doesn't matter that the main character is is the heir of the fallen kingdom. It like doesn't really make sense. And overall, just the whole like, the characters were not interesting at all. The romantic subplot was not interesting at all. I didn't feel like there was any reason to root for the two people to be together at all. So overall, like, it was not bad. It was just really not for me. Red Side Story by Jasper Fforde. This is the sequel to Shades of Grey, which came out a long time ago. Like, I read it more than 10 years ago, easily. Probably like 15 years ago, something like that. I was in college when I read it. And so now, we only now get a sequel, finally, and I think this is probably going to be the final installment in the series. So this takes place in a world in which everything's governed by what colors people can see, and the vast majority of people are colorblind or colorblind except for one color, all of that. So everything is dictated by that. So that affects what jobs people can have and who people can marry. One thing that I really like about this book as well, and Jasper Fford's books overall, is that the dialogue and the internal monologue are so like snarky and witty, and people do not actually talk like this at all. It's very like, in this book we have the main character has to get married to this lady. She's very upfront about wanting to just kill him off once she has his kid, and he's very like, okay, like acting like he's very blasé about it, and it's just very weird. And people like, it's like all of Jasper Fford's books overall, just across the board, are like that. Like, people don't talk like that. And it's just really funny, and weirdly enough, like, just makes the whole book like really nonsensical and super weird. So it's just a very, very odd setting and a very, very odd book, and I really enjoyed it. And last but certainly not least, The Frost Queen's Blade. This is a fantasy romance about a girl who becomes the queen of her father's kingdom, and an assassin tries to kill her, and then because the assassin is from the enemy kingdom that she is trying to make peace with, whereas her advisors and such just want war, she enlists him as her bodyguard because she knows that he knows that if she dies, there will be war. So she knows that even though he's her enemy, she, he will do whatever he can to make sure that she does not die. So as far as fantasy romance goes, I have been looking for more and more of it, and mostly been very disappointed with, like, I don't know, like 75% of the fantasy romance that I find, because either it's just really cringy or just doesn't, like, I just don't understand why we want the two people to be together and all of that, because that's the whole point of a romance book. You want to be rooting for the couple, and a lot of the times I don't get that. But in this book, it definitely did that really well. I definitely wanted the two people to end up together, and I definitely knew, I mean, it was pretty predictable exactly what was going to happen to make that happen. But overall, it did a really good job, and I really enjoyed this book. So anyway, those are the books that I read in the first half of June. Let me know what your thoughts are, and if you have read any of these, you can let me know what you thought in the comments, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!